Okay, so we're at 3 o'clock, and as I said to anybody that was joined a minute or so ago, this is the Maverick AV Solutions webinar, and it's entitled Meet Without Travel. And I'm myself, Jane Hammersley, and Jon Sidwick. He's the guy on the beach hut behind him as well. We're going to be talking to Dr. Harriet Shortt today and Katie Joyce. We're lucky enough to have two leading experts in space and people with us today. One note of housekeeping before I start is we are opening the webinar for questions right at the end. So any questions that you have, and going throughout, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If you put your questions in there, we will get to them at the end of the webinar. If, of course, we're inundated with questions, which I really hope we are, please be participative. We will get back to you on email afterwards. So your questions will not go unanswered. If we know the answers, you'll get them. So welcome once again, Jane Hammersley from Maverick and Jon Sidwick. We have with us Dr. Harriet Shortt, and we first met Harriet a couple of years ago at our Connect event, and we were blown away with some things Harriet had to say, certainly around organisational workspaces, how people work and how people connect. And Harriet is a professor at the University of West of England, an expert in organisational space. And we thought it'd be a great idea to share Harriet's knowledge with us right now in this time where we're all spending a lot more time working in perhaps unfamiliar environment, and how we want to be productive in that. And also Katie, thank you very much for joining us as well. Katie Joyce, ex-NHS, you may be drafted back in again soon if you're not careful. Now a senior lecturer at the West of England University as well. But Katie is a professional coach for teams and individuals in the virtual environment. So, and has done her research in that as well. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. We're really happy to have you in our own virtual environment today. As you can see, you're on the beach in the Maverick Tiki Bar. So John's bought us all cocktails, so we're all nice and relaxed. Thank you, Jon, for that cocktail. It's very kind of you.
You're welcome.
So if we just start, I wanted just to start with Harriet, really. I mentioned in the introduction, we're all working perhaps in an unfamiliar environment, remotely, more like lockdown and working from home. What advice, pointers, tips can you give us to make our environment probably more productive and more effective for us?
Okay, it's a really good question. So thanks for kicking off with that one. And by the way, lovely to be here. I wish I was on a beach somewhere. So I think one of the things that we need to acknowledge is the fact that we've all just been kind of dumped into this situation. So, working from home generally is something that, should be really a considered choice by individuals and organisations together and with line managers. All of a sudden, we've kind of just been dumped into this situation where the home is now quite a complex shared space. And so one of the things that I see in my research in organisational space is the complexities of shared space there. So we have touchdown spaces, we have spaces at university where staff are and students are, and we have to kind of negotiate how we use those spaces. And of course, in the home, all of a sudden the home is still the home, and it's suddenly become a workplace. It's become a gym, an exercise space. It's been become a classroom. My own dining room has been appropriated into a 4-year-old's reception classroom. And so we're all having to kind of work with that complexity. And so I think one of the most important things to do for those of you who are at home, particularly with other people, whether you're with partners, families, children, whatever it might be, is recognising everybody's needs and talking about those and actually having a conversation about how you create a space at work. I think it's really easy at home, rather. I think it's easy to say, I'm reading a lot online at the moment about workspaces and buy some plants and be by a window and have a dedicated workspace. And it's really hard to get a dedicated workspace if you've just been dumped into this situation. Not everyone has that ability. So I think it's really important to have a discussion with people that you're at home with, no matter how small It might be think about what you can do to make your space effective right now. That might be a really, really small thing. And this is going to take some time as well. Everyone keeps talking about this whole process being a marathon, not a sprint. And so it's going to take time to create those spaces, so and test them out. So for example, my husband is on calls all the time, every day, talking. I like quiet space because I'm reading or writing for a lot of my work. So recognizing that different spaces will offer you different things. They're just like at work, where you have different spaces for different activities. You know, you'll go to a meeting room for a private phone call. You will go to a touchdown space to hopefully connect with somebody. You might go to a hot desk to do some other sort of work. It's the same at home. So it's a bit more complicated than thinking have a dedicated workspace. Actually, what spaces in the home can I negotiate with those that I'm sharing my space with and use for different purposes? And like I say, that might take some time. That takes ongoing management and thought. So don't expect miracles straight away. Test it out first.
It's a good point, actually. That whole just coming in. We used to talk work-life balance, but now our work-home life is completely integrated and almost seamless and
absolutely. And that's another thing that I'm noticing. Is this idea of boundaries. So this sort of, you know, this fluidity of boundaries. So at the best of times when this isn't happening, it's enmeshed together, right? So we are all really, the whole work-life balance thing sometimes have a bit of a problem with it, because I think it assumes two things that need to be balanced. Actually, they're all in a mix together anyway. I know that when I'm on the train on the way to go and give a presentation, I'm checking in with the school about my daughter. You know, all our thoughts and our lives are kind of meshed together in the current climate, even more so. And there's this real sense at the moment of, you know, everyone's available all the time, and everyone's available to everybody in all parts of your life. And we're having to adjust to things that don't really normally feature in our day, and that can be spatially too. So I'm having to get used to, you know, I'm lucky I've got a separate workspace at the bottom of the garden. I've got a glass door. My daughter, my 4-year-old daughter, is in the garden, and naturally she's playing, and I'm having to get used to, Mummy, look at this. Mummy, look, can you see this? Mummy, watch me. I'm on the swings, you know. And I've talked to other working parents as well who are having, you know, sounds bad, but, you know, getting used to sort of getting hugged in the middle of the day by your child, you know, if you appear in the kitchen in the middle of a coffee break or something. And it's lovely.
Yeah.
And in a way you think, oh, should I be really, you know, appreciating this? And it's really wonderful. But boy, does it cause some complexities in terms of how we make those boundaries. So I think even more so now, it's about giving yourself permission and getting other people to give you permission, like your organizational manager, to create some boundaries, even if they're just temporary and fleeting, that you know that there is some boundary around you. And that again goes back to negotiating how you repurpose space in some way with people. And I know, Katie, you know, obviously in all your coaching work, you talk about boundary making. So I don't know whether that fits with some of what you're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, certainly. It's absolutely crucial to kind of, in addition to boundary setting, is keeping that an element of structure, I think, and routine, but at the same time trying to make that distinctly separate to what you would normally do in the home, so that there are very clear boundaries that start to emerge. Okay,
yeah, that's a good one. And I think, back to your point, Harriet, our lives are meshed so much that I'm a bit the same as you. I'm surprised by things I'm having to do now, where I'm used to working from home. My life was great when I worked from home and I was on my own, and now I'm juggling people coming in through the door when I don't want them to be, walking out past the window, and I've shut all the blinds and everything. It is that boundaries and giving ourselves some space and time around that.
I think the other thing to mention that might be slightly controversial at this point in time, when we're talking about the social part of what we need to keep doing and be connected. And I see this a lot in my research about workspace. Every single project I've ever done in any organisation, people talk about privacy and the fact that we are living in a very transparent world at work, whether you work in hairdressing or whether you work in an open plan office. You know, our lives and our work are often very transparent, they're very visible to clients, customers, or we're just working in a very open space. You know, we can see architecture sort of moving towards, you know, glass structures. So I think, and I think that mirrors somewhat kind of like what you're saying about this, sort of, you know, I'm the same as you. I'm used to working at home, and there's a little beautiful moment between 7:30 when my husband does the school run with my daughter, and 8:15, where it's just me, cup of tea, early morning emails, and BBC Breakfast, and I've lost that. And that's my private, that's actually my just like moment of calm. Okay, like collect yourself for the day. And so, you know, it might be controversial because, like I say, we're talking about the very important nature, particularly mental health wise, in terms of being socially connected and staying connected. But if we're at home with others and we're sharing that space, and as Katie was talking about boundaries, you know, I don't think, you know, we shouldn't forget the kind of little moments, just 5 minutes out, you know, little moments.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? We all, I think we all finding it completely different around that. And I think one of the things that really fascinated me when we last met at our Connect event is you talked about liminal spaces, and you can explain what those in a moment. I had no idea what a liminal space was until I talked to you. Are you seeing things like, liminal spaces, which are water coolers, coffee machines? Are you things like that? Are they transferring into the home as well? You know, such things like that, which we expect at work, are people kind of ingesting those into the home environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's something I've thought about anyway. I'm quite interested to talk to colleagues as we kind of go through this process about how they're used. But like you say, if you'd like me to explain what a liminal space is. Yeah,
go on, please.
So a liminal space essentially is an in-between space. The word limin, it comes from the Latin word limin, which basically means in between. Often talked about in relation to we go through a liminal period of time, like a transitory period of time going from A to B. In terms of actual physical space, it's considered this sort of in-between non-place, sort of no man's land, and there's a nice description in some of the literature about there are 3 counties in the UK somewhere, I think, and there's a little bit of land that doesn't belong to either of them, and so that little bit in between those 3 is considered a no man's land because there's no jurisdiction on that piece of land. And that's where a lot of bare knuckle fighting used to happen, because it couldn't be illegal, because that space didn't belong to anyone.
I didn't think we'd get to bare knuckle fighting on this call.
But essentially on or in a liminal space, but like anything can happen, sort of anything goes. It's not owned by anyone. No known social norms are expected. The opposite of a liminal space is a dominant space. So at work, that might be a meeting room, a staff room. You know, we know what's supposed to go on in those spaces. Liminal spaces at work are things like corridors, stairwells, lifts, toilets, cupboards, side streets, that kind of thing. And in my research, those sorts of spaces have come up as really important spaces where people create territories. It goes back to the idea that we spend a lot of time in shared spaces. We don't have a lot that's our own. And so liminal spaces can often be created. People often create their own little territories in those liminal spaces, or they're used for moments of privacy and time out and 5 minutes. People just go, in all my research, people go and hide in toilets, hang out on stairways, you know, it's just to have a few minutes. So at home, I've been thinking about, well, what are the liminal spaces at home? You know, like there are hallways and stairways, landings, cupboards, under the stairs. These could all be liminal spaces in the home. And what might they or could they be used for? So we're talking about, you know, how do you get your 5 minutes of peace and quiet, perhaps? Could a liminal space in your home provide just a moment of calm? Could a liminal space in your house provide a place of work? So I was on a Zoom call with my colleagues the other day, and one of my colleagues was on the stairs with her laptop, and we talked about it afterwards, and I just said, oh, you know, out of curiosity in terms of liminal spaces, you were in one, and for her it was because that was a good place to settle down to work, and that was where the really good Wi-Fi connection was for her. And actually, in terms of our learning about working from home, that's actually a little tiny piece of data that the organisation could do with knowing about, because actually, in terms of resources that she has or hasn't got, you know, the best way she can have a virtual conversation is on her stairs. Now, good thing, bad thing, it's some learning at least. And so, yeah, and thinking about, you know, I'm sort of thinking about my own situation, you know, where you've got to create a workspace somewhere. You know, you might be chucking a child out of a spare room where they normally dress up and make a mess. You know, could a cupboard under the stairs actually be a really good den? Or could the landing become a place where they could play, and that frees up other spaces in your house for you to work? So it's just these tiny kind of micro things that might help. So
yeah, we've actually seen some great pictures. Sorry, Katie, go on.
No, you carry on, John.
No, I just think we've seen some great pictures of understairs workspaces being created, because of exactly that reason. People, you know, if you've got 2 or 3 people in the building, how do you fit them all in? Anyway, Katie, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Harriet, you and I have discussed in the past around virtual spaces as well, and whether that can be considered a liminal space. And I'm just sitting here, you know, thinking about, as an example, being blogs, people who blog, and they, you know, are going to that space. And you mentioned the word territory, creating territory. For many people, going to a blogging platform is their outlet, it's their private space. There's evidence to say that, you know, it's like journaling, isn't it? It's your go-to place of where there's silence, but yet also a means to communicate thoughts, feelings, emotions. So when you're thinking about liminality, it's, you know, do also consider the virtual environment and what impact that can play as well.
Great.
Yeah, it's good actually, because actually I'm sitting here thinking, I want a home working den. I mean, who's built a den recently? That'd be such a great idea, just to have a home working den. And also you can be in a liminal space in the virtual world, because it's obviously you're not constrained by anything. I think because while we're living in that virtual world, we kind of just get heads down, we get stuck into stuff, and sometimes we think, well, I do. I've been at my desk all day, and I think, you know, crikey, I've not achieved anything all day, although I've answered probably 100 of John's emails in one go. But, you know,
as if I send that many emails, Jane.
No, never. You know, I have been productive. It just sometimes, you know, you've been in your own head the whole day, and you perhaps don't feel like you have been. Is there any tips or tricks, Katie, that you can advise us on how to feel a little bit more productive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to start with, it's around an element of self-leadership, you know, and looking at what you can control, what elements you feel are achievable. You know, so starting to consider what's important for you as a person, for me, and just thinking about the performance of self. So what can I do to make myself better? Because until I'm functioning as I to my potential, I can't really support others. So there's definitely you know, something in goal setting, just setting small achievable goals, and again, it's that element of structure, keeping structure, setting your own goals. Yes, we have our, you know, our sort of team goals and projects that we're all individually working on. I'm just thinking a little bit smaller than that at the moment, just to help us adjust to this new way of working. Positive self-talk. You know, we're awfully cruel to ourselves and unkind at times. So coming from an angle of what is actually going well, rather than searching for what am I not achieving, what am I not accomplishing, what's going well, can be a really helpful strategy. Rewarding yourself for these small accomplishments.
That's not the cookie jar, Jane.
Well, yes, or the fruit. You know what? I have seen a lot of people posting around how much time they're spending to and from the kitchen, rewarding themselves maybe from the fridge or from the biscuits.
Yeah, and it is just those small rewards. It might be just going to go, make tea, sit outside for 5 minutes, going to go and walk the dog, watching your favourite TV programme later in the evening, whatever. But just it can really have a very positive sort of impact on your mental well-being if you can do those small things to help. Harriet, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned, the idea of self-leadership, which is, this whole idea about you're able to influence yourself and motivate yourself directly, and then you can kind of perform better. For me, I always think about kind of how does that kind of play out spatially, and what does the physical environment, how can the physical environment help you to self-lead? And there's a fair bit of research out there that talks about how the more you have ownership over your workspace, and the more you can create a sense of identity in relation to your workspace, which is often why I take issue with clear desk policies and hot desking and that kind of thing, but that's another debate. But it's really important to be able to create a sense of self in relation to your work. This isn't just about like a real functional thing. Have you got a desk, a chair? It's not just about ergonomics. This is about an emotional kind of connection to your workplace that says something about who you are. Massively important. I mean, again, in every project I've ever done, this has come up, and always connects back to a sense of well-being. And the self-leadership literature, one of the little bits that it talks about is how you can self-cue. So this relates to Katie's point about positive self-talk, keeping yourself going and all that kind of thing. And self-cueing is essentially using the physical environment and finding cues, so be it posters, pictures, postcards, lists, whatever it might be, and having those things within your physical working environment to keep yourself on track and keep going and keep progressing. But I guess also a word of caution in my critical management studies hat on is just being really cautious about using the word productivity at the moment. These are not normal times, and so there was a great article in the Huffington Post, which maybe we can share the link to, that talks about don't being guilted into feeling productive right now. There's also quite a lot of I mean, I'm a massive Instagram person, and there's tons of stuff at the moment about, you can use quarantine to learn how to sew and start stitching this, and this could be a great project, and find a hobby. And I'm like, we're in the middle of a massive crisis, like people are worried about like their job and their friends and their family and money and food, and and because a lot of Western society's obsessed with sort of our self-worth is connected to achievement, like that's really problematic if that goes away. So I think we ought to like not punish ourselves because productivity can't look the same. And this is probably more of a discussion for the organisations and leaders to be having, is that productivity doesn't look the same right now as it would. So it's sort of being aware of how we're using that word in this context.
I'm glad you said that, because I needed an excuse not to learn Chinese over the next 3 or 4 weeks. So I don't have to do that now. One of the interesting points that we've discussed, and that we're obviously in the technology business. We sell the technology which enables things like this to happen. And we're always saying things like, keep on mute when you're not talking, one rule, and always have your camera on. Jane and I kind of almost say to people in meetings, we will not talk to you until you put your camera on. Now, but how does that work in looking at me now, Harriet? Because we're actually inviting people into our private space. So you wouldn't normally invite 20 strangers into your front room to join you for a meeting, but we're actually doing that. And we have many meetings where you have the kids on, the dog on, you've got your own environment. Yeah, how should people approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I think I think that should be a point for debate in lots of organisations at the moment. Is virtual team meetings, camera on or off, and why? There's lots of positives for having the camera on, and I've spoken to a few colleagues and other friends who are in different sectors, and everyone's, the camera's on, and everyone's sharing, and actually something really socially important about that. I think it was really interesting at our team meeting the other day. You could see where people were sitting outside and inside. People sitting with their children, with their pets, on the stairs, people having their lunch, because actually the meeting was over at lunchtime, so fair enough, people were eating their lunch. Actually it's sort of a window into people's lives that you wouldn't otherwise see, and actually there could be some real positives to that. Conversation starters, things that you didn't know people did, thought, said, wore. Some colleagues I haven't seen looking casual before, and that's interesting. But I think there's something, to your point, there's just a sensitivity and empathy that organisations and leaders should have around the fact that, by turning the camera on, you're essentially inviting people into your home. In our industry, thinking about students, thinking about you might want to think about the micro politics of your own organisation. If there are people you don't get on with, or people you don't like at work, actually, how does it feel? How does it feel to invite those people in? And I think so the home, by doing all this, the home has become like a contested space. It's both public and private now. It was a private space where you could go and leave work. Now it's opened right up. And just being aware of that and having a conversation about that, whether that's sort of, talking to your line manager about how you feel about that. And all the stuff I'm hearing at the moment is all about managers and leaders talking in a human, empathetic way to their employees. That could be part of the conversation you could have.
Obviously, it's not a problem we've got because we're on an island somewhere in the South Pacific, but I can understand you would have that problem in a home.
This might, right, I didn't know about virtual backgrounds until we talked about them the other day. So this is great. And that actually could maybe solve an anxiety that somebody might have around inviting into your home, but also could be quite an interesting conversation starter as well. Like Jane put up Disneyland, and there's all these options, and I think that's quite cool.
You had a gin bar on earlier, which is not a surprise.
That's to tell everybody that, but I agree with you, Harry. I think it's really important, and actually, just going back onto that point, if we do have a virtual background or even a blurred background, it does kind of demark that space. Is kind of less intrusive maybe, but actually it can show personality as well.
Yeah.
So I think what we've got to remember is we're all individuals in this. Whilst we're all in this together, but we're all individuals having our own challenges. And Katie, I want to just pick up on one thing you spoke about earlier, which was you spoke about possible challenges coaching individuals, and we all have our own challenges in a virtual world that we're living in now. What things can we do to help and coach individuals or even teams maybe?
Sure. I mean, coach, as I said earlier, if you can open up a virtual space to hold any form of conversation, it's a value. It's just an additional space to go to. It's touching on the liminality. It's a hybrid space, isn't it, between reality, real life, and the virtual world. So I just see it as it's an additional space. Doesn't necessarily, I would never sort of advocate be used 100%. Hopefully in the normal world outside of coronavirus, it can complement face-to-face contact, but it's in the sense of it being an additional space. It's around that ability to connect, to ask questions at the right time, sort of powerful coaching questions if you are skilled in coaching, If not, if you're not trained in coaching, just simply asking some open-ended questions, checking in with people. Just simply, you know, what are you doing to look after yourself at the moment? And just asking those sort of very simple but effective questions. It's a good way of monitoring behaviours of, you know, your colleagues. But yeah, it's interesting as well, you know, observe the sort of the more introverted members of your teams, because there's research that will, you know, suggest that these virtual spaces, the removal of the face-to-face contact, the reduction of the sort of visual cues can make some people feel far more relaxed and willing to open up. And again, it goes back to the blogging aspect, where you will see people, you know, share some really sort of meaningful content with the, you know, whoever's reading that to the world. So these spaces can be very, very powerful. And I think at the moment, certainly with team coaching and the climate we find ourselves in at the moment, if you can coach within those spaces, you are increasing the capacity to deal with uncertainty. You know, nobody has the answers at the moment, and generally in business quite often is the case. And I just see virtual space to be just a go-to, a place where you can reflect and pause and actually not be consumed with that that need for speed, control, performativity, just that additional space to process, really, time to think, process your thoughts with someone that can be asking you some really helpful questions that will generate some insight.
That's interesting, is it? How do you keep people, you know, motivate yourself and keep people motivated in your team in situations like this? It's interesting, you see a lot of things going on at the moment. Obviously food and cooking and drinking has been, you know, virtual beer meetings, virtual coffee meetings. I've certainly having more dinner parties than I ever normally would, because they're all virtual. And we talked about actually people sharing their experience through photos. And so there's this food and photos side to what we're doing. Just as a last point or last thought, I'd really like to know what you guys think of what's going to happen with all this as we move back. You know, we come out into the sunlight, blinking back to reality in X whatever week's time. Yeah, how should we take the learnings that we've had from the last, you know, these few weeks or months back into what I could call the real world, but this is fast becoming the real world at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think from my point of view, I mean, one of the things that I do in my research that's a really big part of exploring specifically Workspace is asking people to show me how it feels to work somewhere, and show me their physical work environments and their experiences of those through photography. So I use something called participant-led photography, which is where the participants of my research capture images of their everyday life experiences of their spaces, and then we talk about those photographs, and it's a way of eliciting kind of richer, deeper thoughts and feelings about people's workspaces. And it struck me that this is apart from all the awful things that are happening, this is an opportunity for organisations particularly to do their own research and to gather some really, really rich data that really plays to understanding the complexities and nuances of working at home. So working at home is often a bit of a default answer to flexible working, and we save a bit of money and that's all great. But actually, what is it really like? Well, we're quickly finding out. And so if there was a way that I think to create it, I mean, you could creatively engage with your team right now. There are lots of different platforms that could be public or private, where you could ask people to take pictures. I mean, there are other visual methods as well, video diaries, voice memos, lots of different ways you can do it. but you could ask people to capture pictures of their experiences right now. What's it really like? What's working? What's not working? And you're essentially getting feedback from users, from your employees. That right now could create a really interesting dialogue. And to Katie's points about, you know, opening up, what are you doing right now to look after yourself, and having these human coaching conversations, those photos could actually play into an interesting coaching conversation. But it could also be a shared team thing, right, that you get to see, you know, you're all talking about where you're working and the problems and challenges and funny bits. But as you said, the next bit is when this is all over, and it will be over at some point. What a brilliant way to collectively share and talk about an experience, because everyone would have been through it. There's something about it that I'm still thinking about at the moment, that actually I think it's sort of a traumatic experience. We were sort of, you know, we were like plonked into it, as I said at the beginning. And our VC put up a video the other day that was another communication video, and one of the really important words that he used in that video was, after this is all over, we're going to need to heal. And I thought that was really powerful. And I thought, yeah, because actually after a traumatic event, you kind of need to reflect, you need to talk about it, you need to talk about shared loss or shared learning, all that kind of stuff. And you kind of need time and space to do that. Wouldn't all these photographs that you've collected be a great way to have an exhibition in your organisation, to then talk about actually what was it like, and talk about that shared experience. And then from that, how do we learn, how do we develop, how do we adapt, how do we make improvements, whether it's a sort of emotional thing or a practical work thing. So I think visual methods in that way, particularly sort of capturing this, you know, and Katie mentions that journaling, you know, this, a visual journaling of this experience could be useful right now, but also when it's all over.
Brilliant. That's a great idea, Katie. Yes.
Yeah, I was just to add to that, in terms of, that's afterwards what Harriet's just said there, but just right now, just for managers to just give permission to their team to be experimental, and just to, you know, use their initiative to come up with some creative ideas. You know, for all the trauma at the moment, it's also, you know, an absolutely fascinating period of time. So just, you know, just to encourage team members to just have a go, and around creating those little moments of joy, what works, what doesn't, and just to discuss with each other. There's no wrong or right way at the moment, so why not, let's just have a go.
Well, we had one of our team members in Spain dressed up as Spider-Man in a whole team meeting without our knowledge, and I won't tell you what the Italian guy did in a purple onesie with a surprise and a glitter ball, but it was funny and it was a surprise. So, and it did it. I mean, absolutely created a total moment of joy for that team. You know, it was what was a normal serious team meeting then became something completely different and incredibly great fun. And it's very cathartic, actually. You know, it's this, people want to laugh, they want to release themselves. So, no, really good points. So, Jane, have we got any questions that anybody's asking us?
Yes, we do have some questions, actually. And I just wanted to give one more story about those little moments of joy, because some of our central team have got younger children, and they've adapted their workday. So between 9 and 9:30, they're now doing the Joe Wicks PE with their children in front of the TV. And we've had lots of photos come in from that, Harriet, just to your point. So I think, John, what we should do is take an action away from me. I've written this down. I think we should, if we could start making some kind of visual blog of this, or something that we can look back on, and, as you say, Harriet, heal afterwards. I think it's a really great thing.
Now, note to self, we've got Teams whiteboard, we use Microsoft Whiteboard. We'll start a whiteboard and start collecting the photos and collecting those experiences, and just a great idea.
Okay, so thank you. Let me go to the first question we've had in, and that was somebody's asked us. We've talked about video and how important it is to see and hear people, and especially see people. but how important is video when you connect with people outside of your normal work life? So, for example, John mentioned it, VDPs, our virtual dinner parties now are becoming a thing, virtual beer meetings, these kind of free platform apps that are coming out or out now. So having a drink with friends in the evening is becoming really popular. How important is it to connect with people outside of work on video? Any thoughts?
I think it is important. There's certainly you know, an opportunity here to take advantage of the technology. In terms of making connections, it's all around. Yes, videos can be really useful to kind of shorten that distance between us, that physical distance, but it doesn't have to be videos. You know, there is research that will support the effectiveness of phone calls and written journaling, blogging, etc. So if the technology is there and if we're comfortable to use it, then you know, I think that's fantastic. But there will be people that feel uncomfortable to be on videos, and I think there are other ways if that is the case. Harriet?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think yeah, remembering that there are other ways of doing that. I think it's yeah, connecting with people inside work and outside work. They're all part of our cultural norm. And we have particular rituals in our lives, inside work and outside work, that that make us feel normal, in control. They are a ritual that we're used to. There's a certain way of doing things organisationally that might, you know, really link something to something that's really important in your organisational culture or in your subculture. You know, there are people who have knitting groups at work, or, you know, have coffee on a Tuesday morning or whatever it might be. And outside work, we have important rituals, and you can see how damaging it is when rituals get interrupted. So on a rather somber note, thinking about the difficulties people are having with funerals right now, you know, people can't go to funerals, you know, and that's really traumatic, you know, that must be a terribly difficult thing to deal with, because a funeral and a wake is a ritual that we have to kind of go through, and we go through that process, and then, you know, then the healing begins and all that kind of stuff. So I think whatever your rituals, keep them, because everything else feels out of control. It can feel very overwhelming. I think control the things that are close to you. You can't control all what's going on out there. Control the things that are close to you. And if it's Friday night drinks with friends and it means you're going to turn it on and have a video drink, then so be it. But I think it's worth remembering how important those little rituals are in our lives.
I could just add to that as well. I think it's around that, if there's any means for us to sort of put that upfront investment in relationship building, which in turn develops rapport and consequently trust, any of those things can only help, really. And these, you need to be able to create an environment of psychological safety. So if by having, you know, a glass of wine at a dinner party virtually is a way to do that, then do it, you know, if you're comfortable to do it.
Okay, lovely. I like that. I've got permission now to have lots of virtual glasses of wine with my friends, so that's perfect.
No, real glasses of wine on a virtual meeting.
Yeah, virtual. Yeah, well, they can drink whatever they like, and I can drink my gin and tonic. I've just got a comment from somebody. It's not a question, but I just wanted to read this out, which was, thanks for a very practical session. I think being kind to whoever you share a space with is key, and being empathetic. And he's almost like, he's saying you've got to take turns. And it's like this, isn't it? The conversation is as natural as it can be in this virtual environment, but you know, we're almost being more empathetic and listening more actively, because it's an unnatural environment, but we're making it as natural as possible. Which I think is a really great point. Now, this next question is going to be aimed at you, Harriet, unless, Katie, I don't know if you have any toddlers at home.
I don't. No.
Okay. Any tips for working mums with toddlers at home?
I am a working mother with a toddler at home. I think having some, well, Katie's alluded to this, having some sense of structure for the day. I mean, my daughter's 4, so in reception. So we've created some structure to her day that vaguely resembles something that looks vaguely like what she might be doing in the morning at school and what she might be doing in the afternoon. And so that's been really helpful in terms of helping our daughter to have a little bit of normality as well, because it isn't normal, because both of us are here and she's clearly not at school. So if there's a sense of normalcy there, that's important. Connecting with the other parents, I think, has been really important. Knowing what other people are doing, I think, has been really helpful. Videos from the school, I would encourage that's where I probably would really encourage video connection at the moment, is communication from leaders and managers in the workplace right the way through to school. My daughter seeing videos of her teachers talking has been, I think, brought a little moment of joy to her day. Wow. So and the same with WhatsApp messages and WhatsApp videos from other parents. Negotiating with your partner, if you have one. I'm lucky enough to have a husband who works at home anyway, so our adjustments haven't been probably as huge as other people's, but negotiating that, you know, I get 9 till 12, I'm with our daughter 12 till 4, I do 4 till 6, you know, we've got this sort of dance going that happens in the garden somewhere where, you know, my husband's coming back down to work and I'm going back up to the house, and we sort of really see each other. But I think that's really, really important. Also, the other thing to say is to absolutely know that if your child is doing a bit of reading from now until September, I don't think that matters. I don't think it matters what else you do. I think there's a lot going around at the moment. I think you can become easily overwhelmed as a working parent, that you should be doing lots of things with your children. There's so much being shared, which is brilliant because technology now allows us to do that. But there's also there was a great quote from a head teacher on Facebook I saw about a week ago that gave me such an enormous amount of relief, that basically said, you're not homeschooling. Stop using that phrase, because you know, you're like, homeschooling's a choice, right? You do research on it, you decide to do it, and this is like you're surviving in a crisis. So, you know,
do the best you can.
Do the best you can. Yeah.
You don't feel guilty about you've got to work, or you want, actually not you got to work. I think we need to work, don't we, as well, if we can, for our sanity. And, you know, as you quite rightly said there, you're giving your daughter that normality. And I think we need as much normality as we can possibly get into our lives right now as well. Yeah. And giving yourself permission. Katie, you talked about that, setting the boundaries. There was another question that said, how do I share the space with a wife who is home teaching with her 20 children, 20 school children? So it's interesting, it's the other part of the lens. So you've got the teacher there who is trying to homeschool 20 children who is not in her home. So I guess, Katie, you would say to that, boundaries, and set your environment out so that Harriet's dance can be performed in a structured way. Yeah, so
really, yes, you kind of answered it there. And I think, just, you know, we have to set, as a manager, we have to set very clear expectations, but with ourselves we have to do the same. Again, that self-leadership. So being very clear with ourselves what we expect, and again going back to goal setting, and monitoring our performance, our individual performance, and rewarding, as we said earlier, I think are all just really key to our success.
I think that point about how do you share your workspace with a wife who's obviously a key worker and still having to kind of engage with lots of children online. I mean that's really difficult, and I think you know, like I said, a lot of what we can see, you know, when we search about, you know, how to work from home and that kind of thing, this idea of a dedicated workspace suggests it's a proper workspace, and having it dedicated sounds almost permanent. I think cut ourselves a break, go and work wherever it works. So if you're working in your bedroom on your bed, okay, ergonomic people will probably not be happy with what I'm saying, but if that's the only place that you can go and do that, then that's okay, as long as you remake the space later into bedroom and what a bedroom should be, a haven of loveliness and quality sleep, that's okay. So I think it's just making sure that if wherever you make the space, I mean, it's a bit like normal life, I guess, for us, is the living room in the day is sort of slightly chaotic, and after school there's Lego and there's bits and there's stuff. Come 7:30, I don't want the sign of a child anywhere near me in the living room, because I need it to be a grown-up space of a living room where I can watch a film and have a glass of wine, and that's our time. So I think as long as if you're having to appropriate a space that you otherwise wouldn't into a workspace, like a bedroom or a spare room or whatever, wherever it is, as long as you create it and then remake it later, then that's some sense of boundary making.
Love it. Okay, fabulous. Now I think we've got time for one more question. I have found I am now communicating more than I did in the office, and video calls are beginning to get in the way of just getting stuff done. John, this isn't me, by the way, just in case. This is actually a question. And then the question is, how can I say no to a call? That's an interesting question. It is because I think we're in there.
What do you think, Katie? Go on, Katie. How do you say no to these? How can Jane say no when I keep on booking those calls in during the day?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I've had that exact conversation with someone, and I think the other thing is as well, when we're communicating this way, it actually forces our concentration to a much deeper level than if we were face to face or in an open plan sort of office environment. I've seen people as well on videos, they're closing their eyes when they're talking. Just observe, see if you see it happen. And to me, that demonstrates that deeper level of concentration. So I think it's not only a case of the impact this is having in terms of time, the number of video calls or phone calls we're having to make, but it's also quite physically draining. I think we'll adapt, we'll get used to it, and you know, we'll get much better at it. I think we need to be very specific with you know, when we are talking, keep things short and slick. And I'm not really answering your question here though, am I? But how do you say no? I think again, it's around the need, and it isn't a real need if we're to maintain our sanity, to create boundaries. And if that means that you're creating some pockets within your day where you just need some time to yourself to catch up, or even if we're talking about productivity earlier, even if it's not to catch up, but to actually just create some space in your brain to be able to perform later in that day, it's a necessity. So
yeah, I've certainly done that. I've actually booked dog walks into my schedule now for exactly that reason. So I don't book it in, I'll book something else in at the same time. Yeah. So I've definitely taken that advice.
Great. That's great, guys. We're almost out of time. I just wanted to quickly give you some of my takeaways. I mean, just for me, Harriet, I've written down beautiful moment. I need to find that beautiful moment in my day, and you need to build yours back in. Maybe it's not with the BBC TV anymore. Positive self-talk. Love that, Katie. Setting those goals, not huge goals that are going to take weeks to deliver, but maybe it's a goal a day. Just something I can look back on and think, yeah, that was good. I actually did achieve that. And the photos, I love that idea. If we can create, a team, it's a team memory then of all of us. And when we do get back to normality and we start to heal, we can use that as a healing process. John, what about you?
Yeah, I think all of those things. I mean, particularly that what happens when we finish, when we leave this environment, and remembering. And I just love the idea of taking photos now. So we will, as a business, start capturing what's going on, because otherwise we'll soon forget it. And I think it's a great reflection point. Also, you both said it, there's a lot of data being generated that we can use in our businesses. I mean, we're using video for everything now. I mean, video suddenly become ubiquitous from the beginning of the day all the way to the end of the day when we have a virtual beer or a glass of wine. So taking that video experience and then moving it into what becomes normality again will be really interesting. And also repurposing spaces. I love that bit about you said about the bedroom. I hadn't thought about that. You're right. You can create a virtual office or an office during the day, but it's good to put it back at night. Because I have seen people, and they've said that my living room has now become an office, and it's an office at night as well, which really means you just never leave the office, which I don't think anybody of us wants to do. Okay, thank you, Jane.
Yeah, we're out of questions, so all that's left for me to do is say thank you, Dr. Harriet Shortt, for joining us, and thank you, Katie. It was a real pleasure to have you on, and maybe I can ask you live and put you on the spot. We've got some more questions that we haven't been able to answer, unfortunately. Perhaps we can do this again in a few weeks or a month's time, if you're free. Yeah?
That's great. Yeah, be a pleasure.
And one of these days we'll actually be doing it together in real life on a beach, drinking a cocktail.
So thank you very much for everybody that joined us. I hope you got a lot out of this hour, as much as I did, actually. And we will, Harriet, you mentioned a link to Huffington Post. So we'll send out the link to this webinar. We'll also include that link to the Huffington Post as well. Right on, keep the dog box. Right, on that note, I'll say thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.